Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you how I evicted the cousin of the housing association boss from my farm. When I pulled up to my farm at the tail end of a gray cold snap, it was a robin that told on him. My front gate creaked open, and a plump robin hopped off the split rail like it had paid rent all winter. He took off toward the hill cabin where a thin snake of wood smoke stitched the sky. Wood smoke. I hadn't lit a fire there since late fall, and before leaving I'd shut the flue, turned the valve off at the propane tank, bled water from the lines, and padlocked the main house with hardware meant for shipping containers. The little cabin on the hill was secured too, latched properly, reinforced with screws, but it didn't have a key deadbolt because I'd never needed one. It sits deep in my acreage, invisible from the county road, and I don't keep much of anything valuable inside. A twin bed, a potbelly stove, a little table I built from white oak, and a cabinet full of mismatched cups I can never bring myself to throw away. The driveway crunched under my tires as I climbed. I don't live here full-time. I'm a seasonal inhabitant, a winter caretaker of my own land, if you can call it that. I come for the cold and leave before the spring storms make the clay roads mean. In my absence, the farm is preserved. Shutters fastened, fridge unplugged, traps set only for mice, pipes drained, notes taped where even I can't miss them. Remember to open this valve last. Turn the water heater back on only after refilling. I crested the hill and saw a set of footprints in the last patchwork of snow, boot prints with a bite taken out at the heel. And at the porch, a battered duffel bag, 2 neon grocery sacks, and a coffee mug I'd never owned, half-frozen black with a cartoon raccoon flipping the world the bird. Real classy. The cabin door was shut, but not latched, and the previous week's wind had pushed dried leaves up against it like a tide line. I heard movement inside. I cut the engine, stepped out, and my breath poured in little clouds. "Hello?" I called. My voice sounded both familiar and strange on that hill. A man's voice came back, not the neighborly "hey there" I'd have expected in a place where everyone knows everyone else's dogs by name. It was clipped and annoyed, and worst of all, certain. "You can't just walk in here." "You're in my cabin," I said. He opened the door and stood framed there, mid-30s maybe, sunburn turned a winter pink, hair buzzed short with the clippers I keep in my main house bathroom. He wore one of my old flannels, my name tag stitched inside the collar from a job 3 lives ago, and a pair of boots that had been on a shelf in the mudroom, the scuffed toes unmistakable to me. He didn't seem embarrassed. He seemed inconvenienced. "I have permission," he said. "You must be the caretaker. This is my place through the summer." I blinked at him. "I am the owner, and you need to start explaining." He rolled his shoulders like he was about to deliver a lecture. "Keaton, I'm the cousin of the head of your HOA, Laura. She told me the small house on the hill was unused, a health hazard even. Said I could do you a favor by staying here, watching over the property, making sure there's no vandalism." He dropped the name like it was a badge. People in our little cluster of properties sometimes try that with the HOA, as if being on the board confers a tiny crown. Our HOA controls the private road and common pasture fencing, and has a document longer than a summer day about signage sizes and what shade of brown is acceptable for mailboxes. It does not notably grant occupancy rights to my cabin. "That's not how any of this works," I said. He looked past me toward my truck, my county sticker on the windshield, the big steel toolbox in the back that's dented from a decade of hauling fence posts. "Look," he said, the tone shifting to false patience. "I don't want any fuss. I've been here since right before the solstice. I'm settled and I'll be here until after the rains. We can work out some arrangement. I've improved things up here anyway. I scrubbed the stove. I've been splitting wood. I put weather stripping along the door. That thing was letting half the county in." A thought ran through my head. How he'd know the cabin leaks air if he hadn't been staying. I took 2 steps onto the porch. "You broke in," I said plainly. "That latch on the inside? You can't open it from outside without either taking the window trim off or prying up the threshold." He smiled in that way people do when they want to pretend the words you spoke are a quaint opinion. "It was open," he said. "A neighbor told me you leave it this way for local hunters and hikers sometimes." "I do not," I said. "We're done with this conversation. Grab your stuff." He reached behind the door without looking and grabbed his phone. He lifted it like a talisman. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "And if you try to push me, I'm calling the police. There's a process. I have tenancy now." He kept talking, but my brain snagged on one word: tenancy. I've read up. Any homeowner in America who ever leaves their place for a month at a time eventually reads up on the difference between a trespasser and a tenant. On what changes the picture when someone has been living in your property. Possession matters, but so does how they gained it. If he climbed in through a window and then made himself a coffee, he was a trespasser. If I had rented to him or even implied permission, that was messier. There had never been permission. I had receipts and photographs of a winterized cabin to prove it. He started dialing, eyes on me, chin up. I took out my own phone and stepped back off my porch. "Great," I said. "Let's make it official." He told the dispatcher there was an intruder at his house on the hill. The words made my stomach feel like I'd swallowed gravel. When he gave the address, he gave the right one, my address. But his voice was steady and very sure. He even described me: green jacket, knit cap, dark truck, middle-aged, calm. He did not sound like someone improvising. He sounded like someone who had practiced a line in the mirror. I got on the line with dispatch as soon as he hung up and explained, gave my name, my parcel number, the fact that I had just arrived and found someone uninvited in the cabin, the HOA tie-in, the fact that the main house was padlocked with keyed locks and this cabin had never had one. I'd installed trail cameras along the fence line on the west side after I started losing bird feeders and potted plants years ago, little infrareds high enough in the cedar to catch faces, not deer. I told dispatch I had photos from the last 2 months and could produce them, and, more importantly, my deed and the assessor's record. She was calm. "2 deputies en route," she said. "Please wait by your truck." I did. I kept my hands visible. I didn't go inside. I stayed away from the porch. I back-footed down the hill far enough that if he tried something with the axe leaned against the cabin wall, I'd have options. He shut the door with a theatrical click and dragged something heavy across it. My oak table I later found, which left a 4-foot gouge in the floorboards. I stood breathing and listening to crows talk trash to each other. And I thought about Laura. Our HOA president is one of those people who reads the bylaws the way a pastor reads scripture, with reverence and an eye toward correction. She'd hassled me earlier that year for putting a little metal rooster on my gatepost because the guidelines said natural wood or natural stone. I took the rooster down for a month to keep the peace, then put it back because my gatepost is mine. She also had a habit of calling my place seasonal, like it was an insult. She'd made pointed comments at meetings about abandoned-looking properties and liability if vagrants enter, and had floated the idea that members of the HOA, meaning her, should have the right to inspect properties for fire safety. I'd told her in front of everyone that no, the board could not enter my land without my permission. My cabin was not in common area, and the county fire inspector had already given me a gold star for creating defensible space. The deputies came fast, crunching up the hill, winter lights splashing on their windshields. They parked behind me. One, tall and built like a fence post, introduced himself as Deputy Merritt. The other, a shorter woman with neat handwriting on a small notebook, was Deputy Casares. I gave them my driver's license, told them plainly, "It's my property. I'm seasonal, winter only. This cabin shouldn't be occupied." He says he's been here since before the solstice. He says he has permission from the HOA head. They split the difference, not entering yet but knocking and announcing themselves. After a minute, the door opened just enough for Keaton to stick his head out. "Thank goodness," he said, eyes wide. "This guy was trying to force me out. This is my rental." "Do you have a lease?" Deputy Casares asked. "It's more informal," he said, "a land use agreement." "From the owner?" she asked. "From the HOA," he said. "They manage this property." I watched their faces do that thing cops' faces do when they recognize a sentence as legally empty. Deputy Merritt turned to me. "You said you have documents." "In the truck," I said. I pulled out the plastic folder where I keep everything just in case. Copy of the deed, last year's property tax bill with my name and parcel number, a printed email from the county recorder from when I made a change to the driveway culvert that required notification, photos of the cabin winterized, dated, and a small thumb drive with the trail cam images downloaded 3 times. If you live rural and travel, you learn to leave a breadcrumb trail for yourself and anyone official. They gave the deed more attention than people expect, not because it proves full context at a glance, but because they can radio dispatch and confirm it with the assessor in 2 minutes. While they did that, Deputy Merritt asked basic questions, all of which I answered. When I last left, early December, whether anyone had permission to be here, no. How the cabin is usually secured, interior latch, screws through window trim. What I'd noticed, footprints, smoke, my flannel being worn by a stranger. When the radio crackled back that the parcel belonged to me, my stomach unclenched a fraction. Deputy Casares asked Keaton again for any lease or written authorization. He tried a different angle. "I have proof I receive mail here," he said, pulling out a pile of catalogs. The top one was Farm Supply Outlet with current residence stamped across it. He had nothing with his name. He had my electric bill, unopened, forwarded from my town P.O. box, also addressed to me. "Step out, please," Deputy Merritt said, more a request than a suggestion. Keaton came onto the porch with his hands at his sides, the phone in his back pocket like a shark fin. Up close, he smelled like my cabin. He was wearing my wool socks. "Did you enter by force?" Merritt asked. "The door was unsecured," Keaton said. "Can we look?" Casares asked, directing the question to me. "Yes," I said. "Please, everything in there is mine." We walked to the threshold. They looked at the jamb and the threshold and the little screws I had put into the trim 2 years ago because the cabin had shifted and the window didn't seat fully in its old groove. Those screws had been backed out and then spun back in at a different angle. The latch showed pry marks, shallow crescents. Inside, my oak table was against the door at a diagonal, scuffing a track into the planks. "Sir," Casares said to Keaton, still polite, "how did you get those screws out without a bit?" "I carry a multi-tool," he said. He dug one out of his pocket. It had a little Phillips head that fit the screw perfectly. Deputy Merritt glanced at me. "Did you give him permission to enter by unscrewing your window trim?" "No," I said. "Did you at any time invite him to live up here?" "No," I said. "I don't know him." "And he's been here how long?" He didn't give me a chance to answer before Keaton said loudly, 3 months. He said it with the tone of someone trying to lay claim. I watched Deputy Casares write down the number and circle it. They conferred quietly and then did something that will be etched in my memory forever. Deputy Merritt kept his voice measured and asked Keaton to turn around and place his hands behind his back. He did not yell. He did not make a show. He just explained, "You are being detained for suspicion of burglary and for making a false report to law enforcement." The click of the cuffs sounded like the first real thing that had happened all morning. Keaton protested, "This is ridiculous. I'm the one who called you," which did not appear to be the defense he thought it was. False reporting is its own crime in our state, and calling 911 to claim a stranger invaded your house when you forced entry into someone else's is a problem. He said the word tenant again, and Deputy Casares answered with something I'll quote imperfectly here. "Tenancy requires consent or a lawful right to possession, not the act of staying in a place after forcing entry. The presence of your belongings does not transform a trespass into a lease." They sat him on a porch chair and asked permission to do a sweep of the space for weapons. He agreed loudly because he thought, I suspect, they would see his few things and be moved. Inside, they found my battery drill, my little propane cylinder screwed onto the stove with a leak at the seal, the space heater I keep for emergencies plugged into an extension cord that ran to a generator. I don't keep the generator in the cabin. That had been moved from the main house shed, lock cut cleanly. Deputy Merritt spotted the cut lock like a hound. It was in a coffee can by the stove, tossed there with the same confidence as that first, "You can't just walk in here." They radioed in for another unit to transport, and then Deputy Casares stepped aside to make another call. When she returned, she told me there'd be a property crimes detective contacting me within 48 hours and asked me if I wanted to press charges for burglary and criminal mischief, and whether I'd be willing to provide the trail cam footage. I said yes. She nodded like that was the only reasonable answer. As they were moving Keaton toward the car, a Subaru I recognized from the HOA meetings came fishtailing up the hill. Laura got out, scarf flying, posture wound tight as a spring. She didn't look at me. She aimed herself at the deputies. "This is a misunderstanding," she announced. "I authorized my cousin to stay on this property as a safety measure. There's been reports of prowlers." Deputy Merritt did not sigh, bless him. "Ma'am," he said, "HOA authority does not extend to granting occupancy in a member's privately owned dwelling." "But we have an emergency clause," she said, crushing the words together. "We can act to secure common welfare." "The cabin is not common area," he said. "And emergency clauses do not grant you the right to enter another person's land or home without permission. You are not law enforcement." She swung her attention to me then, finally. "If you would just be reasonable," she said, using my name like it tasted sour. "He was doing you a favor. By breaking in, by moving my generator, by wearing my clothes?" I kept my tone steady. "By calling the police on me at my house?" Her eyes flickered toward Keaton, whose face had gone to concrete. For the first time, I saw doubt cross hers, just a hairline crack. Then it sealed over. "This is harassment," she said, but not as forcefully. "It's called burglary," Deputy Casares said, "and false report." Laura tried again. "Surely we don't need to escalate this. He can move out by the end of the week. Let's not ruin a man's life over some miscommunication." "Ma'am," Deputy Merritt said, still patient, "that ship sailed when he pried the window trim off and called 911 to say the owner was invading his house." Something in me settled in that moment. I'd been shaking one hand slightly. Adrenaline, cold, anger, all the usual ingredients. And it stopped. I looked at Laura very carefully and said, "I will be filing a police report and a complaint with the state, and I will be calling a special meeting." Keaton began to talk then, fast, a jumble of "I thought," and "she told me," and "you left it empty, that's abandonment," which made Deputy Casares raise an eyebrow so high it could have scratched paint. Abandonment is another one of those words that shows up in amateur lawyering. Property law does not operate like a grocery shelf. You don't lose the right to your house because you want to spend March somewhere with a different sky. They put him in the back of the cruiser. He twisted to look at Laura as they shut the door. She didn't meet his gaze. She looked at me instead with a mixture of fury and, to my surprise, regret. "You didn't have to do it this way," she said. "I did exactly what a person should do when they find a stranger living on their land," I said. "I called the police so nobody would get hurt, and facts could be checked." I also didn't tell her then that the facts would be even less kind once the trail camera footage came to light. I had a sticky note log of dates from motion triggers, midnight entries, an ATV I didn't recognize zipping up the track, a very specific jacket he wore every day, and even because the hill camera has a generous angle, the image of a different man helping him carry up my generator in broad daylight. The date stamp on that one made my stomach fold like a map. New Year's Day. While I was feeding my niece pancakes in my little borrowed duplex in town, this man was hauling my generator up the slope to run a space heater in a cabin that had been properly shut for the season. After they left, the hill was quiet again. The smell of the stove lingered, and I let the cabin air out while I did the careful work of not contaminating anything the property crimes folks would want to see. I took photographs of every scuff and through-the-door scrape. I shot video the way a friend who's a public adjuster taught me. Slow pans. A narrative of what I'm seeing. A hand in frame sometimes so scale is obvious. I picked up the coffee mug and looked at it, then put it down with a shudder. I located my drill and made a note of which bit was still warm. I found the little shaving kit he'd been using by the window and recognized my clippers. He'd cut his hair with them 3 times at least. Tidy clumps of hair had fallen into the track of the sash where he'd pried it open. Down at the main house, I took note of the lock. Cut. The hasp. Scored. He hadn't attempted entry. The shipping container locks and the camera on the eaves probably turned him honest. He'd taken what was easy because it sat far from the road and because my past life of trusting the hill had made it vulnerable. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone. The detective called, took my statement, and scheduled to meet the next morning. I called my insurer to start a claim for the generator lock and the damage to the cabin floor. I called a locksmith who came up with a van that looked like a magician's trunk and gave the cabin a proper keyed deadbolt and a reinforcement plate you could hang a truck from. He didn't charge me the emergency rate after he heard why I needed it. "Happening more lately," he said, matter of fact. "Seasonal homes. People think if the lights are off long enough, it's fair game." Then I made the call I'd been composing in my head. A neighbor named Janie who keeps the unofficial information ledger for our part of the county. She listens more than she speaks, but if you ask her directly, she'll give you a string of facts like laundry on a line. She answered on the second ring. "Back early?" she asked. "Back to a surprise," I said. "Do you know a man named Keaton connected to Laura? Short hair, winter jacket with orange piping, boots with a bite missing at the heel?" She was quiet for a beat. "I've seen him at the mail kiosk with Laura," she said. "He's driven that beige truck with the camper shell that parks near the pond. He told my husband he was land stewarding up your way. I figured you knew. Laura was bragging about it." "What words exactly?" I asked. "I've got family watching over that hill place," she said. She made it sound official. "It wasn't," I said. "Police just took him in for burglary and false reporting." There was a noise I think she tried to hide, something torn between satisfaction and dismay. "Do you need anything?" she asked. "We can bring dinner." "I need your memory," I said. "Dates, sightings. If you see him again here, let me know immediately." "I won't," she said. "Not for a while." Word travels in a place like ours without software. By dusk, 2 other neighbors had texted me with, "We wondered," and one sent me a photo taken in late January of Keaton driving an ATV up my track. The ATV belongs to a guy named Brooks who runs fence down the way. The image was ugly, my track already showing ruts where I try to let the ground rest in winter. It showed a confidence that felt like a hand in my pocket. That night I slept in the main house because that's where my bed and my sense of protection live. I sat at the breakfast nook and watched the moon flatten itself on the pond outside like it wanted to skate. Before I turned in, I walked the perimeter with my flashlight and checked my new locks twice. The cabin on the hill glowed with a single bulb until I went up and switched the breaker off. My boots made the only prints. When I came back down, I felt my shoulders loosen finally and then tighten again as my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize left a voicemail, not quite threatening, not even fully coherent, laced with the same assumption I'd heard at the door that morning. "You could have just let me stay. You're not here most of the time," Laura said. The rest was a tangle of excuses. I saved it, then saved it again to my laptop, and emailed it to myself. Evidence is boring until you need it, and then it's the most beautiful thing in the world. The next day, the detective came by, a man with a clip-on badge and a voice that made everything seem manageable. He took the thumb drive, bagged the cut lock, took photos of the marks on the latch, and the little pile of unscrewed hardware that had been returned to the windowsill like a signature. He asked if anything of value was missing. I said no, unless you count the handful of quiet mornings he had stolen from me by making my hill feel less like mine. He nodded like he knew exactly what I meant and wrote quiet in his notebook anyway. He also asked a question I hadn't thought to prepare for. "Do you want to pursue a no trespass order against both the cousin and the HOA president?" I said yes immediately to the first, and yes with pause to the second, my mind flipping through the next month like a deck of cards. There would be meetings. There would be speeches. There would be neighbors like Janie who say, "This has gone too far," and others who say, "Well, actually, I think the HOA should have the right to insure," and leave you wishing civics class covered boundaries like fences. Before he left, the detective said something you can't script because you don't know how much you need to hear it until someone says it out loud. "You handled this exactly right. You didn't go in. You waited for us. You have your documents in order. You kept your cool when he called 911 on you. Some folks don't. It ends worse." I didn't ask him for details. I didn't want to know how else it ends. By the end of the week, the county jail website showed a booking photo and a list of charges that looked like the beginning of a recipe. 1 count residential burglary, 1 count making a false report to a peace officer, 1 count criminal mischief for the damaged lock and floor, 1 count theft because he'd moved my generator with intent to keep it there. A 4th item also appeared, an old warrant from a county 2 hours away for a failure to appear on a petty theft misdemeanor. It added a sour note to the song. I forwarded the page to my insurer and saved another PDF. I heard from the prosecutor's office the following Tuesday that they'd be moving ahead. They asked me to estimate damages for restitution. I added up lock replacement, floor repair, generator lock, and something else, the cost of having to re-winterize because he had turned systems back on in deep cold. They nodded at that. You can get paid for the harm done to your home and your time, not for the percent of your peace of mind he took. The law isn't always poetry, but it tries to measure. And then, because life insists on running multiple plots at once, the HOA board sent out a letter about upcoming inspections of seasonal properties for fire risk and unauthorized occupancy, with a sign-off from Laura and 2 of her faithfuls. The letter had a tone like lemon juice on a cut. Inspection. Unauthorized occupancy. It felt like a dare. I brought the letter to the county attorney's office with me when I went in to give a fuller statement. "Does your HOA think it has police powers?" the deputy prosecutor asked, reading the paragraph twice. "Because it does not. It thinks it can rewrite reality with official paper," I said. "Would you be comfortable making a report that the HOA president directed her cousin to enter?" he asked carefully. "I'm comfortable stating exactly what she told the deputies," I said, and I wrote it down as precisely as I could remember it. I also posted a notice at the entry to my place the day after I got the letter. "No trespassing. Private property. Entry by permission only. Violators will be prosecuted under state statute number I printed from a county page." It wasn't the sign that stopped anyone. It was the fact that it had the citation, the way a sentence gets heavier when it has numbers tied to it. I took a photo of the sign and uploaded it to the HOA community portal where people post about lost dogs and the time the snowplow forgot the cul-de-sac. No comment, just the sign. 3 minutes later, Laura texted me, No need to escalate. You escalated when you moved someone into my cabin, I wrote back, fingers steady. We'll let the court sort it out. By then, Keaton had been in jail for a week, and the angry voicemail shifted to apologetic ones that sounded coached. First, he was indignant. Then, he was confused. Then, he was suddenly full of voice-cracking sincerity about trying to get his life on track and needing a place to stay for a few months, and not understanding the complicated property stuff. I saved them all. The call logs would later show a pattern coinciding with his meetings with his public defender. And here's the moment I haven't yet told you. When I was first learning the shape of this mess, before the deputies came, before the Subaru spun up the hill, before I saw my own flannel on a stranger at my own door, I saw something on the cabin desk under the window. A notebook. I flipped it open because it didn't belong to me. Inside were notes in a neat block print, dates, names of people who had stopped by, ideas. Fix the step. Ask L for reimbursement. Figure out if generator will run fridge on low. Call lady at the pond about water access. Make a sign. Caretaker on duty. Maybe host people for cash? The double question mark after the last one made me see spots. He had not just been using my cabin. He had been planning a small enterprise out of it. When the detective asked for everything related, I handed him the notebook. He smiled, grim, but appreciative. This is the kind of thing you think only happens in movies, he said. It's more common than you think. People script themselves into your life if you let them. I didn't mention that I'd already hired a carpenter to erase the gouge my oak table carved into the cabin floor, or that I dug through winter bins to find my dad's brass nameplate for the door, or that I mounted 2 more cameras that ping my phone the instant a person steps on the porch. None of that is law. It's ritual. Ritual is how a place becomes yours again. Then came the uglier, cleaner part: meetings, motions, and a recall petition. An HOA president learning that doing a favor looks terrible in minutes and in court, and a cousin learning that calling 911 to claim my hill cabin as his house was the worst gamble of his winter. 2 mornings after the arrest, frost sugared the pasture and the pond lay like a fallen mirror. I brewed coffee and spread papers on the kitchen table. The HOA inspection letter, the booking sheet, my deed and parcel map, and a damages list with taped receipts. A property attorney recommended by the victim advocate asked one question. Got the governing documents? I did. He traced the lines that mattered. They can regulate mailboxes and fence colors, he said. They cannot authorize occupancy or enter your dwelling without consent or a court order. We filed that afternoon. A judge signed a temporary order barring Keaton from my property and from contacting me except through counsel. I tucked copies in my glove box and inside the cabin door, where the new deadbolt gleamed like a promise. Next, I drafted a petition for a special meeting. Our bylaws let owners call one with 25% signatures and 10 days notice, so I wrote it like a fence post set in concrete. Remove the president. Amend rules to forbid board entry to private dwellings without written consent or a court order. Signatures rolled in at the feed store. Notes came with them. About time, wondered about that truck, and a doodle of a hand swatting a key labeled Nope. A few of Lura's faithfuls signed after I explained the difference between vacant and abandoned, and how a 911 call can't turn trespass into tenancy. Meanwhile, the criminal case ran like a steady engine. The prosecutor set dates, arraignment Tuesday, preliminary hearing the next week, and floated a plea offer with restitution and more than a year. I drafted a victim statement made of small, true things. He wore my flannel, used my clippers, moved my generator, and called 911 on me with the confidence of someone who trusts posture more than law. I saved every voicemail and trail cam still because evidence is boring until you need it. We met in the library community room, which smells like pencil shavings and calm. Lura opened with miscommunication. I stood with the officer's report, the 911 recordings, photos of backed-out screws, and the declaration. Not a misunderstanding, I said. Forced entry, 3 months. False report. He's in jail. The room shifted from opinion to fact. The removal vote wasn't close. Terrell, the vice president who fixes chimneys, became interim and read language so clear it was almost boring. Board members and agents have no right of entry to private dwellings without the owner's written consent or a lawful court order. Violations earn immediate censure and removal. At arraignment, bail was denied because of an old warrant. The judge said residential burglary and false report, and noted my no trespass order. At the prelim, the court found probable cause. Within a month, Keaton pled guilty to burglary, false report, criminal mischief, and theft. The sentence? 16 months in state custody, probation after, restitution through the court, and a permanent no-contact order. The judge said the line I keep, "There was never a tenancy. You don't become a tenant by forcing entry and moving in." Cleanup came in layers. A surveyor reset a nudged pin and we filed a notice to preserve boundary. The postmaster confirmed he'd blocked a shady change of address, so I put a standing mail hold whenever I travel. Brooks, the ATV owner, apologized and rebuilt the rutted track with geotextile and rock. The insurer paid for locks and floor repair. The time and quiet remained my cost. Restitution began arriving in small, clean amounts, math as accountability. At the protective order hearing, Keaton appeared by video, mumbled that he thought he'd had HOA permission, and admitted he wasn't the owner. The judge signed the order. I considered suing the HOA. The attorney said, "You've got your remedy. Removal, clear rules, and an order keeping him away. Spend your time on better things." So I built a proper step and wood-burned the year underneath. Inside the cabin, I hung my father's brass plate over the deadbolt. It doesn't stop a driver bit. It declares an anchor. Spring softened the hill. I listened to the 911 tapes once, his certainty versus my documents, and felt grateful for every boring habit. Photos of latches, tax bills, trail cams at the right height. The board adopted a neighbor watch program, voluntary outside-only checks, photos by request, and no one touches a door. One evening I unrolled a welcome mat that just says, "Home." The lock turned smooth. Light pooled the way it should. When people ask if I feel bad he got more than a year, I don't. Consequence fit act. He called 911 on me in my own cabin. Big mistake. He pled guilty, is serving time, and owes restitution until the ledger zeroes out. The board learned its limits. My hill went back to quiet. When a stranger claims your porch, you don't have to yell to own it. Facts, patience, and the right paper do the work. Friends, thank you. See you soon.